The Israeli government announced this week that they killed the Palestinian revolutionary Abu Obeida. Abu Obeida was a propagandist. He was a spokesperson for the National Army of Palestine, specifically the Al-Qassam Brigades, who are the largest faction in the resistance military. These are a bunch of kids and people my age. You know, Abu Obeida was maybe 2 years older than me. And he'd lived the last at least 25 years of his life committed to revolutionary struggle and being a voice that spoke to that struggle and its meaning. And I could identify with that. I'm not a soldier. I've been talking primarily as my contribution for my entire life. And there was one point where I really questioned, what does that mean? Why does it matter? I remember I went to New York City to be trained by a friend of mine. He was teaching me how to be a political leader, what it meant to be a revolutionary, because that's what I really wanted. I wanted to be a revolutionary, and I didn't know how. And so this involved an intensive, which this was a series of conversations. They lasted 10 to 12 hours a day, every day for 5 days. They covered everything from history, theory, personal questions. It was a deeply transformative experience for me. And there was one point when I said to him, well, it's just words. That's all I have is just words. It's not real. And then he stopped me and he said, it's just words. There's no such thing. When the Palestinian people rose up, each time they did, they were armed with more than mere rifles or bombs. It was with words, and specifically the words of the national poet of Palestine, Mahmoud Darwish, who I had never heard of. Never heard of Darwish. I knew generally the relationship between words and revolution, but I'd begun doubting it. And it was the example of the Palestinian struggle that brought that belief and brought that coherence and recognition of what a revolution even was back into my heart. So I looked into, well, who is this Darwish guy? You know, what's his deal? And so, in addition to being the national poet of Palestine, he also wrote the Declaration of Independence for Palestine that constituted them as a state. It turned Yasser Arafat from a leader to a president. Just words. It's why I refer to the militants that are fighting, lightly armed as they are. I refer to them as the National Army of Palestine because of those words, just words. And so I want to read you one of his poems that I particularly enjoy. It's called I Belong There. It goes, I belong there. I have many memories. I was born as everyone is born. I have a mother, a house with many windows, brothers, friends, and a prison cell with a chilly window. I have a wave snatched by seagulls, a panorama of my own. I have a saturated meadow. In the deep horizon of my word, I have a moon, a bird's sustenance, and an immortal olive tree. I have lived on the land long before swords turned man into prey. I belong there. When heaven mourns for her mother, I return heaven to her mother. And I cry, so that a returning cloud might carry my tears. To break the rules, I have learned all the words needed for a trial by blood. I have learned and dismantled all the words in order to draw from them a single word, home. This is what people carried in their hearts when they fought. And it's what we've got to carry, even now. He wrote a lot of poems. Another one is called Identity Card. It's very famous. The last little stanza or two. Write down, I am an Arab. You have stolen the orchards of my ancestors and the land which I cultivated along with my children, and you left nothing for us except for these rocks. So will the state take them, as it has been said? Therefore, write down on the top of the first page, I do not hate people, nor do I encroach. But if I become hungry, the usurper's flesh will be my food. Beware, beware of my hunger and my anger. It's not just words. So that reminded me, it brought me back to this news of Abu Obeida. And I began to think, okay, well, what were his words? What did he say? And so this is, I'm going to read a little bit from his last speech. And I think it really does crystallize a lot of the political content of this moment and clarifies the nature of the struggle and why he had to be killed. So here goes a couple of, I'm going to skip around. For 4 months, the enemy has continued its sadism against civilians and children, indulging its gang's obsession with the systematic destruction of neighborhoods, cities, and civilian residential areas. It persists in this battle and in this brutal war against our people. 21 months, summarized by the steadfastness of mountains from the fighters and resistance of our people, and the patience of prophets from our great, proud, and generous nation. 21 months of shame and disgrace have haunted the wicked, occupying usurpers, along with disgraceful abandonment by brothers in blood, Arab identity, and Islam, except for those upon whom God has shown mercy among the sincere and the fighters, among the oppressed and overwhelmed peoples, and among the free people of the world who remain in harmony with their humanity. And then they continue. We are proud of the steadfastness and heroism of our fighters, and we are deeply aware of the pain and suffering endured by our wounded people and our patient families, whose pain we live with day by day. Our fulfillment of the duty entrusted to us by our Lord in resisting and fighting this enemy does not absolve the 2 billion strong Ummah from its own duty, a duty it has unfortunately abandoned. We say this to history with all bitterness and pain, and in front of all the sons and daughters of our nation. O leaders of this Islamic and Arab nation, O its elites and major parties, O its scholars, you are our adversaries before Almighty God. You are the adversaries of every orphan child, every grieving mother, every displaced, homeless, wounded, devastated, and starving person. Your necks are burdened with the blood of tens of thousands of innocents who were betrayed by your silence. And then he continues. Salutations to all free people in the world who are striving to show solidarity, break the siege, and lift the oppression from our people by all means, disregarding danger, betrayal, and attempts at defamation by the hypocrites of this nation, who think every outcry is aimed at them. All initiatives and expressions of solidarity from the free people of the world, whether they succeed or are sabotaged under Zionist pressure, are a source of pride and honor for our people. We call for these efforts to escalate and continue, and for the exposure of this enemy by every means and in every arena and field. That was Abu Obeida. It's not just words. So I wanted to think back more on this question, And I was brought back to another man of words that I knew, not personally, but felt. And that is Refaat Alareer. This man. So he was a professor. A lot of the major leaders in the Palestinian struggle are literary figures, actually. Darwish is one. Even Yahya Sinwar, he got his degree in literature. And Alareer is another. He actually studied for part of his time. He's from Gaza originally, but he studied for part of his studies in London. He could have left Palestine. He could have left Gaza. But he returned and he taught at the local university. You have to keep in mind that scholasticide, or the killing of the production of knowledge, is a key element of the Israeli war. Not just now, but for many decades. The denial of them, the Palestinians, to be a people requires a destruction of their knowledge and their capacity to produce more. So Alareer's choice, which it very much so was a choice, to teach his people, was a revolutionary contribution. And so he was a contributor to one of my favorite publications, which is the Electronic Intifada. And he did an interview with them. And this is from a bit ago, not long before he died. Because the Israelis killed him. Not by accident either. They killed him. It's not just words. So, here's what he said.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there's no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like, drown? Like, commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I'm an academic. Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they target us, charge at us, open door to door to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose.
And they killed him. So it's actually pretty hard to talk to people about this war sometimes, because I understand that people want to speak to the genocidal acts that are happening, and all of that is true. But on the other hand, there's real leadership and sacrifice that people, and contributions people are making to a war against this genocide and against this state of Israel and the imperialist system that sponsors and sustains it. It's not their words are not in vain, and it's not just words. Whether you are a professor, who will not leave your people, will not abandon your students, or the head of an armed insurgency, the chief propagandist. Their words matter. We have to carry them. So perhaps the most famous words of Refaat Alareer, which he was a literary scholar, the most famous words are in this poem. See, I told you there's a lot of poems in Palestine. It's called If I Must Die. If I must die, you must live, to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. Israel killed him. And in all this death, it's easy to become pessimistic. That's why it's hard to talk to people about this. Because I'm not pessimistic. I see the determination and I feel the sacrifice. Not just with the people in Gaza, but people all over the world who've carried these words, carried the memories of so many people, and have stood in ways great and small and said no more. And it matters. And I'm confident. And what I'm confident in is that the destruction being wrought at this very moment will not prevail. Because there's this idea among a lot of people, as Mao said long ago, there's this idea that weapons decide everything. Weapons decide everything. Right? They think that weapons determine the outcome of everything. But what we believe, these words, they matter. A lot. Because it's people who ultimately decide. And that's important to recognize. And that there's a role for each of us to play. We are part of the people. That the liberation of Palestine is not up to the Palestinians alone, and it's not for just the Palestinians. Israel has been behind, and not because they're in command, but because they're a subordinated lackey of imperialism. They provide arms, logistical, and technical support to the most brutal and repressive regimes around the world. From Latin America to Africa to Asia. Probably Europe. I can't think of it right now, but probably. They supported apartheid South Africa. They supported many wars and brutal repression campaigns throughout Latin America, Central America in particular. They provided arms. We've always heard about the spy technology that has been developed through the deaths of Palestinians being applied to other people around the world, including here in the United States. Israel has been built up as a key lodestar in terms of capital, security, and technology for the service of the imperial system. It must be defeated. And I think it will be. It will be. But I want to go to this quote. This is a Mao quote. It's pretty famous. This is from The Situation and Our Policy After the Victory in the War of Resistance Against Japan. It's from 1945. So, this is, again, 1945, August to be exact. And atomic bombs have just been dropped. And in the face of that, he says, not even atomic bombs decide. So again, the destruction that Israel is able to unleash does not decide. We do. So here's what he says. The theory that weapons decide everything, the purely military viewpoint, a bureaucratic style of work divorced from the masses, individualist thinking, and the like. All these are bourgeois influences in our ranks. We must constantly sweep these bourgeois things out of our ranks just as we sweep out dust. That's one version of it. There's another. He says another thing in another piece from 1958. Weapons are an important factor in war, but not the decisive factor. It is people, not things, that are decisive. The contest of strength is not only a contest of military and economic power, but also a contest of human power and morale. People necessarily wield military and economic power. So that brings me back to Abu Obeida and why he was so important. It was part of the morale structure, not just in Palestine, but around the world. Because the fighters, they operated in teams. They had a propaganda unit that would accompany the fighters. So all the footage that we've seen of operations on the ground in Gaza that were carried out by the Joint Operations Room, they ultimately are under Abu Obeida. And he was a key propagandist for telling the tale, as Alareer would say, of the struggle in the people. And that brings me back to some of these key themes that he had spoke on, right? He's talking, and this is, again, remember when all those trials, the show trials around the Ivy League schools were going on, and they were talking about the Intifada being anti-Semitic. The Intifada is not simply about attacking the state of Israel. The Intifada was also against the Arab power structure that was engaged in not just acquiescence, but full-on collaboration and abdication to the Israeli project. It was an intifada against both of those things. And you can see the reverberation of that in Abu Obeida's talk when he's castigating all of these Arab nations who not only betrayed, but also directly fuel the Israeli state and its death machine. All those Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, even non-Arab states, Turkey, are key regional supporters of Israel, if not formally, informally, and many of them formally, like Egypt and Jordan. And so this idea that you can't fight, you have to just lay down, the Intifada rejected that. And Abu Obeida carried that on in his speech. He also spoke to, beyond just the regional and religious question, that's what they're doing when they reach out to the free people of the world and the oppressed and all of this. It's a different formulation, broader one. And it's complicated, of course, by the Islamism and its roots, particularly with like the Muslim Brotherhood, and in the case of Iran, with the Revolutionary Guards. It's a complicated question in history. Well, maybe I'll get to that at some point in the future. But it's important to see that they speak beyond it. So this document, which this is the official English language discussion of the October 7th attack, or Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. This is how it starts. Our steadfast Palestinian people, the Arab and Islamic nations, the free peoples worldwide, and those who advocate for freedom, justice, and human dignity. So that's how it's starting. It's speaking to me. It's speaking to you. And they don't want us to hear these words. They want to speak to the futility of the resistance, of revolution, of struggle. They believe so thoroughly in their weapons and in their money and in their communications and surveillance technology that they're willing to carry out a genocide in 4K every single day. And they believe they can do so with impunity. And they're offended when we object. I remember in the election last year between Biden and Trump, I talked to some Democrats around me and they want you to vote for, Kamala Harris or whatever. And I said, I will never vote for a Democrat, ever. And they're like, well, what about all of these domestic policies that'll be worse if you don't vote for a Democrat? I said, there's no limit to what I'm willing to sacrifice and pay. No limit. Yeah, my life will be worse if Trump is elected. I don't care. My life will be specifically worse. I got a bunch of student loans. And when I say a bunch, I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. And you've seen what the Trump administration has done on the student loan question. And I knew they were going to do that beforehand. And I would tell people, I will be directly, materially harmed by Trump winning this election. I don't care. These Democrats have been part of carrying out this genocide. They're imperialist scum. And I won't trade the lives of the Palestinian people for $1. And they get mad. That's why it's hard to talk about this stuff with people. So, what is required of us is to honor the sacrifice and the words of these people that have come before us, that have given the maximum to the liberation struggle. Like this guy on my shirt, Ghassan Kannafani. He was the leader of the PFLP, well, one A leader. Also a literary man, a writer of stories, of tales, as Alareer said. Israel killed him too. I identify with these people of words. And then I get to questioning, what do they expect? They expect for us to either not know about the heroism of so many people that we know and have even never heard of. They expect us to ignore or forget about it or not be moved by it, and instead identify with people who fly planes over unarmed people without air defenses and drop bombs on them, who sit behind tanks at a distance and shell buildings from afar. It's a suicidal death cult, all in the service of a US-led imperial project and order that is disintegrating and cannot stand. That's the thing. It's not blind faith that gives me confidence. It's not just my emotional attachment to the strength and valor of the people of Palestine. It's also a recognition of the context that we're in. This structure is in a terminal decline. And it's because of that since the war in Vietnam, which cracked the foundations of U.S. imperialism and the capitalist world economy generally. How? They resisted. They fought. And the U.S. spent so much money. They borrowed. They printed so much money that it disrupted the entire structure of capitalism globally. And that's why they had to get off the gold standard. And since then, the U.S. has lost its ability. And I mean, this started before, but particularly since then, the U.S. has been in a slide. And what is clear, and has been for many years, is that it's not just the U.S. in a decline. It's the capitalist world economy in general. No power is able to create a reproducible, stabilizing arrangement to any of the pressing questions. The Palestinians were relegated or fated to oblivion decades ago. They're supposed to go away. And they won't. They will not yield. And it's the cracks widening ever so much that have allowed them to push through right now and to reach us and to transform our orientation, not just to the Palestinian struggle, but to the structure as a whole. And Israel is, like I said, a key fulcrum of that imperialist project globally. And its crisis is reflective of the broader crisis, the terminal crisis that is afflicting that system. That's why I'm confident. Now, the question is, will this crisis, this decline, this collapse that is an ongoing process, it's a multi-generational process. We are easily about 50 years into the process. give or take a year. Will this process result in a more egalitarian, more just system or set of systems even? That's one direction. Or will it be a more brutal and exploitative and annihilationist system? That's what Israel represents. That's why it must be defeated. That's why the Palestinian struggle is the leading edge of the liberation struggle of our time. It's bigger than Palestine. So, I want to thank those people who have given everything. And I want to honor them in whatever way I can. Because weapons will not decide this war. We will. We must.